Hello, my name is Austin Belzer, and welcome to another conversation from Slamdance 2025. Today, I have the director, screenwriter, and producer. Let me know if I get this wrong. Lola Rock'n'Rolla from the documentary The Big Johnson. The Big Johnson is a documentary that documents Dean Johnson's life as a drag queen, rock star, LGBTQI activist, and many other things. The Big Johnson will have its world premiere at the sold out screening, by the way. Congrats. At the Summer and David Theater tomorrow, followed by a second screening this Sunday at the LA Times Theater. Lola, welcome.
Hello, Austin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a busy week, so thank you for taking the time to really talk to me and talk about your film.
Absolutely.
Speaking of your film, what drew you to Dean Johnson's story?
Well, Dean was one of my best friends. I played in his band, his second band, the Velvet Mafia. I was a flying nun and saxophone. And we played CBGBs together once a month for God, like 6 years, 7 years, something like that. And I just loved him. So I usually make horror comedies, but after he died in a very mysterious way, I decided that this is going to be my first documentary. So it's my first feature, my first doc, and here we are premiering at Slamdance. So yeah, excited.
And you touched on something there that I kind of interested in. So you said you knew Dean. I'd love to hear about how being friends with him kind of affected the documentary process, trying to be both objective and then talk about your friend as well.
Well, I really tried to be, I tried to represent his story and his beliefs as well as I could without him here. Knowing him, the grief was big,
Yeah.
interviewing everyone else who knew him. The good thing about knowing him is that I have a lot of connections to everybody that I interviewed. Like most of the people in the film are people that I've known for 10 or 20 years. And, I knew their connection to Dean. The hardest part was just talking about his death over and over again. This is someone that I loved and I really, really cared about, and we still don't have the correct answers to why he died. You know what I mean? Was it a
Mhm.
drug overdose? Was it murder? We still don't have those answers. And I feel when you look like that, it's just a lot more heartbreaking than if someone, dies unexpectedly. Like if they die unexpectedly and it may or may not be nefarious, it makes it the injustice of it a lot bigger, not just for me, but for the entire queer community in New York City. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd imagine. And then you also talked about something that I want to touch on. You said you made a lot of horror comedies,
Uh-huh.
and this is your first documentary. I would love to know um, what that switch was like because a documentary is very different from a horror
Oh my God,
comedy, I think.
it's so different. With narrative, you tell it what to do. With
Yeah.
documentaries, it tells you what to do. Like I kept thinking, oh, I'm done with this now. And then somebody I'd talk to would be like, oh, you really should talk to so and so, or you really should talk to so and so. And so you have to just leave yourself open to just find what the story is. And I thought as I began the documentary, oh, I'm going to be queen of the neighborhood. I'm going to solve this. We're going to find out if it was an OD or a murder. I'm going to, whatever. And some of those things are just unknowable. I was only able to get one police officer to talk to us, and he was later arrested for sex with a minor. So there you go. And so, documentaries, you're just sort of you have to just be open to what happens. You can
Mhm.
mold it, you can try and mold it, but in the end, it molds you. Whereas with narrative, you write a script, you tell somebody cut, do it again. You can, you can kind of make it whatever you want to make it. But with docs, I think you really just have to be open for the footage itself to tell you what it's going to be. So yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of a interview I did. Gosh, I've done so many interviews this week. It's kind of blurring all together.
Yeah,
But
slam dance, baby.
somebody I forget who said I'll probably remember in the post-production process, but they said their documentary, I think maybe Joey Earns Rewards maybe is the one I was talking about, but their film really came together in the editing room.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. Yeah. I mean, we spent I don't know. We spent like kind of years shooting, but we really spent a lot more time on the edit. And then also with docs, like, we had a whole section on, there was this great party in New York at this bar called The Cock, and the party was called Foxy. And it was like, what would you do for $100? And it was like so scandalous. And Dean was one of the hosts. And we had this whole section on The Cock. And then we couldn't, all of the archive people didn't want to sell it to us. And so we had to cut that whole section and kind of morph the film into something else. And so I think you have to be a lot more uh like not hands-on, but during the edit it kind of tells you what it's supposed to be.
Yeah,
Yeah, and for me I always come back to like what I just want to be as true to Dean and his character as I could possibly be, because like all of us, he was a flawed human. He did have a drug problem in the 80s and 90s, and so it's completely possible that he OD'd, but he was sober a week before he died, so who knows. Yeah.
yeah,
And he was also sober for years before he died. I mean, he really was like, all buff, working on his body and all that stuff. But some things are just sort of unknowable. Yeah, but the documentary process is really, really different because you have to just be open for it to sort of tell you what it's going to be. So we
yeah.
had 100 hours of footage, 100 hours of footage. And I had to cut a lot of incredible interviews that I wanted to keep just because it didn't fit the narrative of the story. So, yeah.
Yeah, I bet. I think it was I talked about that in another interview. I promise I'm not trying to plug in other interviews during
Oh,
an
I don't
interview,
care. Do your thing.
but
Like,
I think he said I think it was Joey Earns Rewards or the whole story director that said something similar. Was like, oh yeah, I had an entire different plot that was happening outside of the narrative, and we just had to cut it all, even though it was
yeah.
really interesting because it didn't serve anything.
And there's this editing phrase, just when in doubt, cut it out. And you just, that just happens. I have Jackie Beat in my film, who to me is one of the funniest comedians you'll ever meet in your life. And same with Lady Bunny and Sherry Vine, they're hilarious. And so something would be incredibly funny, but I'd have to take it out because it just didn't fit the story, even though I
Yeah.
would have loved to keep whatever it was in there. So yeah, yeah, you just never know.
And that kind of brings me to one of my questions. You've got a lot of interviewees, Taylor Mack, Jackie Beat, Lady
Yeah,
Bunny, you
Taylor's
just
great.
said.
Yeah.
Like, how did you decide who to include? I know you talked about a little bit about like already having a lot of that work done for you because you knew Dean, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, just knowing Dean and being a part of his band and being a part of this scene, in New York, as still a part of the LGBTI
Hmm.
2S, all of that, all the letters. I'm a part of that group. And so that gives me access to people, and it lets people sort of relax with me where maybe they couldn't relax that much with just a stranger or whatever. But it also made it difficult because it's like, oh, I love this person and I want to keep this in here. Is it really for the best of the film, or is it just that I love this person and I want to keep this in here? We interviewed Michael Formica Jones, who is a genius drag queen, and it just didn't fit in the film. And Formica is one of my best friends. And so I had to like, tell Formica, I'm like, you're amazing, but Ed just couldn't fit it in the movie. And I had to do that a few times with people that are just really incredible that donated their time and all of that stuff. But, you just have to do what's best for the film. At the end of the day, you just have to surrender to the film gods and just be like, okay, this is what it's supposed to be. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
But
think
knowing him and being there at that time really helped me sort of mold the film and make it, my biggest hope is that people at the end of the film will be like, oh, I felt like I just spent an hour and a half with Dean Johnson, you know? And so knowing him and knowing really who he was at his core helped me do that quite a bit. So, yeah. And also made me not give up when you're in like year 5 of the documentary and you're just like, I cannot believe I'm still working on this. Having love for the subject definitely helps you make it to the finish line. So yeah.
yeah, and I think I'd be remiss to mention, you also wear quite a few hats on this film.
Way too
Documentary
many hats.
writer. Yeah, way too many. I
Well, that was
think I
budgetary. I would love to fire myself as a producer. I would love to, writing and directing is what I do. It's what I'm best at. Producing is a whole different brain thing with budgeting and scheduling and all of that stuff, but there just literally was no one else to do it, and I couldn't afford to pay anybody, so it was my job. At one point I was producing, directing, and editing. I was going to shoots and then going back home and cutting, and that was pretty intense. But indie filmmakers, you just have to do what you can do to finish the movie. So, and I'm free to the production, so
Yeah.
and those jobs landed on me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think yesterday uh for the Earns Awards interview, they said their budget was like $30 or something like that. I was
Yeah, yeah,
insane. But I want to take a left turn and talk a little bit more about Dean. Um,
sure.
like, what do you think made him such a magnetic presence in
Dean was one of
what?
those
Yeah,
rare people. I mean, it didn't hurt that he was 7 feet tall in heels, but he was one of those rare people where when he walked into a room, the whole room stopped and turned around and looked at him. He was just a dynamic force for queer love and change. He didn't give a shit what anybody thought about him, and he just was who he was at all times. And the thing about Dean that's funny is he might have been this like 6'6", bald, buff guy, but there was a lot of feminine energy with him too. He really was like in between genders, and he really didn't even believe in gender that much. Yeah, he always used to talk about Native American cultures have 5 genders, and he thought he was like number 4 through through one or whatever, and he really was very sex positive, and he just wanted to help queer people not be ashamed. He really was anti-shame, and I think that his whole life speaks to that. It was really sort of freedom versus consequence.
yeah,
The freedom to be a gay man in the 80s and discover that you're queer and you want to have sex with a lot of men, and then consequence. He ended up with HIV. It was all freedom versus consequence. Even with his record deal, he got signed to Island Records, and he was one of the only out musicians at Island Records, and that in turn ended up with him losing his record deal because he wouldn't shut up about being gay because we were in the middle of a plague, and he wasn't going to be in the closet in the middle of the AIDS crisis. Fuck you. So, I think that's what really made him rare.
yeah. That's a great answer. I'm sure some people will be coming new newcomers to Dean's story.
Sure.
Um, I'd love uh, to hear from your perspective, what you hope they take away and like from his story, and what you think Dean's reaction would be to the documentary.
That's a really, really great question. I think that what Dean would have wanted from people knowing about him and knowing about his story is just for them to be unafraid to push the limits of what they want to do. He was unabashedly himself at all times, no matter the consequence. No matter where he was or what he did, he was always himself. He didn't like hide in the closet. He didn't act like he was someone else to make somebody else feel better. He was like, this is who I am. And if you don't like it, I don't care. And so I think for, young people coming up, hopefully they'll bring activism to the table because everything that he did, whether it was like, and I'm not even kidding, I've went to one of these things, like a 2,000 person sex party, in the middle of Chelsea in some fancy club, to like, writing a song about what the government is doing to gay people. Everything was about activism and forwarding the cause of not just queer people, but all people.
Mhm.
He really didn't stand for any kind of racism, sexism, homophobia. He did not stand for it. He was a Pink Panther. Do you know about the Pink Panthers? In the 80s and 90s, they were a group that would walk gay people home so they wouldn't get gay bashed. You know,
Okay, I've heard of that.
and he
Yeah.
really like he stood for our community. Like, he it was very important to him that women were allowed in gay clubs. Before Dean, there were no lesbians at gay parties. There were no trans people. And he brought the whole community together. And I think that that's the biggest thing that I took from his life is we're stronger together. There's all these like talks of like lesbians being anti-trans. Fuck that. We're all together and we can't win and succeed in our own rights, forwarding our rights as humans unless we do it all together. They try
Mhm.
and separate us so we have no power, and we got to take the power back, before it's gone.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you, Lola, for taking the time to talk about your documentary, The Big Johnson. Uh,
Oh, thank you, Austin. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, the Big Johnson is what he named his penis. And I
I
woke up from a
figured,
dream one day, and yeah, I woke up from a dream one night, and I heard his low voice in my head going, "Lola, name it after my penis." And so that's why the film is called The Big Johnson. So good on you, Dean. So yeah.
yeah. Well, if you're going to be in LA, people at home, the Big Johnson will have its world premiere at the sold out screening at the Summer and David Theater tomorrow, and a second screening this Sunday at the LA Times Theater. I'll include a link to buy tickets in the description of this interview. And if you enjoyed this interview, I'm recording two more after this, so you're gonna have plenty Slamdance interviews. So just stay tuned for that. But until next time.
Thank you so much, Austin. Nice talking to you.
You can find me on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads under my username, Austin B Media, as well as my Discord and Patreon community chat. Speaking of Patreon, if you'd like early access to this next interview or more exclusive content, head on over to patreon.com/AustinBmedia. For just $3 a month, you get 48-hour early access to my reviews, podcasts, interviews like this one, and articles, plus patron-only channels on my Discord. The $10 a month tier, you'll unlock uncut podcast episodes, exclusive episodes, and more. If you enjoyed this interview, stay tuned for more Slamdance and South by Southwest 2025 interviews. Until next time.